Okay, welcome back, everybody. Goodness gracious, that month went quick, didn't it? Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Pam Kastner, and I have the honor of serving as Patent State Lead for Literacy and welcoming you once again this month to Patents series, celebrating the 20th anniversary of the publication of The Amazing Reading Road by Hollis Scarborough. Joining me this evening is my dear friend and colleague in this process, Nancy Hennessy, and my dear colleague from Patent Pittsburgh, Jeannie Hertzler. We're so thrilled to have you back. Tonight, our focus will be vocabulary strand, and we were very, very fortunate to have the eminent researcher Susan Neuman present for this session. She is actually on vacation in Maine. She was concerned that possibly she would have internet problems. So what she's done is she's pre-recorded the session. So we'll launch that shortly. We'll also share in the chat the Padlet link that has all the sessions prior focused on this series, as well as the resources. This recording will be added to that Padlet this week, as well as the PDF of the PowerPoint. It's not currently there yet because we just don't have the PDF of the PowerPoint yet, but we do have the recorded session. So that will be up soon, and we'll put the PDF of this presentation, the PowerPoint, very, very soon as well. Next month, we will be joined by Nancy Eberhardt, Nancy Hennessy. I said it's going to be Nancy squared next month as we really hone in on syntax next month. As you likely know, our dear friend William Van Cleve was to present that session. So we will also be introducing a tribute to William that evening as well to launch that session. So we sure hope that you can be here on August 31st. But wow, we're so excited to have so many of you. I said, gosh, it's a beautiful, at least where I am in Pennsylvania, it's a beautiful, sunny, warm summer evening. And I said, gosh, I hope we have some folks come and attend live. And gosh, here we are at 160. So thank you so much for joining us for this series. We are so appreciative. I'm going to read Susan Newman's bio, and then I'll switch to a different screen and launch the recording of Susan's session. Please ask questions in the chat if you have any during this session, and we will forward them to Dr. Neuman for her to answer. So please, it's still a little bit interactive here. Please add to the chat if you have questions. All right, so let me share Susan's, Dr. Newman's bio with you. Susan Neuman is professor of teaching and learning at New York University, specializing in childhood education and early literacy development. Previously, she has been a professor at the University of Michigan and has served as the U.S. Assistant Secretary for Elementary and Secondary Education. In her role as Assistant Secretary, she established the Early Reading First program, the Early Childhood Educator Professional Development program, and was responsible for all activities in Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Act. She has served on the IRA Board of Directors from 2001 to 2003 and other numerous boards of nonprofit organizations, and served as co-editor of Reading Research Quarterly from 2011 to 2018, a flagship research journal. Her research and teaching interests include early childhood policy, curriculum, and early reading instruction, pre-K to grade 3 for children who live in poverty. Dr. Neuman has received 2 Lifetime Achievement Awards for research and literacy development and is a member of the Reading Hall of Fame and a fellow of the American Educational Research Association. She has written over 100 articles and authored and edited 11 books, including the Handbook of Early Literacy Research, volumes 1, 2, and 3, with David Dickinson, Changing the Odds for Children at Risk, in Teachers College Press in 2009, Educating the Other America with Brooks in 2008, and Multimedia and Literacy Development by Taylor and Francis in 2008. Her most recent books are Giving Our Children a Fighting Chance, Poverty, Literacy, and the Development of Information Capital, Teachers College Press 2012, and All About Words, Improving Vocabulary in the Age of Common Core Standards, Pre-K to Grade 2 in 2014. So now I'll start the recording of this amazing researcher and presenter, Dr. Susan Neuman. And we did test this out at least a dozen times, and it was always working. So we're crossing our fingers that the technology gods are still with us. So here we go.
Hi, I'm Susan Neuman, and I'm delighted to come together with you today to talk about vocabulary development, a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I'm a professor at New York University, and I'm thrilled to be talking about this topic. Today, I wanted to start with just a wonderful shout out to Hollis Scarborough and her work on the reading rope. I think it had a transformational view of reading that really helped so many people understand what it meant about the various skills in reading. The reading rope focused on language comprehension and word recognition. This was a topic that was popular by Tumner and Goff in their simple view. But what Hollis did so effectively is she focused on the various elements of these two critical, important areas. Under language comprehension, she focused on background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge or print concepts. And she showed that while we focus on these independently, increasingly they come together in a consolidated way to ensure skilled reading. So I think what she was able to do is focus on what is language comprehension, a topic that many people are very interested in, but haven't been able to articulate quite so as well. At the same time, one of the things we recognize is that when we focus on oral language and vocabulary, we can't quite separate the skills that we saw in the initial reading rope. And that's because vocabulary is about knowledge. That when a parent talks to a child and they're conversing, those are knowledge bits that are coming over the transom to the child. And every time we talk with a child, we are conveying knowledge. So while we might think of these things as separate, they are really very much a consolidated concept. I use the tip of the iceberg to describe this because when we think about words, we might think about that tip of the iceberg. These are words, but actually words are conveying knowledge and they're conveying concepts for our children. And so the more we engage children in language and vocabulary, the more we are engaging them in developing knowledge, facts, and concepts, important language structures, as well as encouraging children to verbally reason using language, which is so critically important. So the way I think about it, and this is our instructional goal in my view, is that vocabulary, we can't think about just teaching words and vocabulary. We've got to think about the relationship between vocabulary and content knowledge, that when we use words, we are conveying knowledge and developing knowledge networks. And so there's a reciprocal relationship between the two. Vocabulary improves content knowledge. The more content knowledge children have, the more vocabulary they will learn. And this other thing that this emphasizes is that we need to start early because it's very important. Vocabulary is a slower process than some of our other skills like alphabet knowledge. And so we have to begin at the very beginning when children are very eager to learn. So let's look at these beautiful children. When we see these children, I love their little goofiness and their imaginative development. But when I think about these kids, I think that they come to school and they are eager to learn. They want to learn about their universe. They want to learn about how things work. They're inevitably imaginative and curious. And this is a wonderful time for us to teach language because it is a primary way. In other words, we say sometimes that the speed of acceleration of language actually occurs at 4 years old. And of course, children continue to learn lots and lots of language, but the speed begins to slow a little bit. So we've got to use this time to really take advantage of their eagerness as well as their opportunity to learn. So when I think about early language development, how does this happen? And what are things that we need to be very well aware of? Well, first, children learn through direct experiences. They learn through interactions with those that are closest to them, their parents, their kids, their family, their friends. Their social interactions directed to them, as well as those that are overheard, are critically important. So children will learn by direct interactions, parent-child interactions, for example, but they have peripheral vision, you know this. And so they're also learning from what they're hearing others are doing. You'll see it very often on a playground where they're playing, but they're also very aware of what everybody else is doing and will often stop their play and go off and have language interactions with other children. So these social interactions are so critically important for children in learning vocabulary. Otherwise, they could learn from television, which we know they learn a little bit, but certainly not the kind of social interaction through social interactions. So one of the things we also know in these early years is that motherese or parentese talk is so critically important. So you've heard it a number of times. I have a wonderful dog and I'm walking my dog in the morning and I'll see a mother in a stroller with a stroller and the child inevitably looks at my dog and will say, Gaga, Gaga, and gestures to the parent and the dog. And the parent will say, oh, that's right. It's a doggy. It's a doggy. Now, you and I know that the child has said gaga. It's a far cry, frankly, from doggy. But I want you to know some of the wonderful interactions that are going on here. The parent is praising the child because the child has made an attempt, right? It's an approximation, we would think. And that approximation, in whatever form, is praised. That's good. And then the parent will use prosody. It's a doggy, a doggy. They'll use expression to get the child excited and to emphasize that word. And then finally, the parent will say doggy, actually using phonological awareness in syllables and slow it down for the child so the child can begin to articulate the words. So all of this, parentese and motherese, is extremely important for children who are learning words so that they can hear the words clearly and begin to mimic them and try them out. So as I said, children learn through mimicry. They want to be like grown-ups. They want to be like their older sibling. And so what they'll do is they'll engage and often use words that are quite sophisticated, but make no, don't fool yourself. They don't really know what those words mean. They're just using them because they're fun. Children like words and they want to try them out. So they'll often use sophisticated words that they have absolutely no understanding of. They're just trying it out, which is so wonderful. Finally, children learn different words in different contexts. And this is something that our research is really beginning to highlight. We often think that children learn words through storybooks, and we'll talk about this in a bit, and surely they learn a lot of words through storybooks. But children also learn through lots of experiences you can have in the classroom, or experiences through field trips, or going outside and digging for worms outside. Each experience tends to provoke different kinds of words. So for example, if a mother and child are in a grocery store, for example, what they're doing is they're often using grocery related words. They're focusing on cereal and vegetables and milk, and they'll use those words, find the milk, help me get the cereal. They'll use those words frequently, and they'll use a very consolidated bundle of words. And so the children will learn words associated with the grocery store. The same thing is true when they go to the laundromat. They'll go and they'll hear about words like fold and wash and dry and fabric softener and detergent and those kinds of words, and they'll begin to hear them again and again. And so they'll learn those bundles of words. So every experience encourages a different group of words, and that's how children extend their understanding. So this tells you the classroom teacher needs to focus on many different experiences, not just with text, but actual hands-on experience that allow children to use different bundles of words. This is one of my favorite quotes, that children learn language as they interact with responsive adults and peers and experience language use in meaningful contexts. Now, I'd like to highlight a number of words here because I think, in essence, this talks about vocabulary development in oral language. The children learn about language through interactions. So we have focused on the importance of teachers and parents and kin engaging children in those interactions because they're trying it out. Those are approximations. They also learn with responsive adults. So in other words, the child will say, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. And if the parent says it's dinner time, it doesn't show responsiveness to the child. So instead, the parents say, oh, what might you want to eat if you're hungry? So in other words, a responsive adult takes what the child has said and extends it, recognizing, acknowledging what that child has just said. In other words, I'm listening, I hear you, and enhancing and modeling what that extensive talk. And finally, children learn through meaningful contexts. So they learn by being in the grocery store, by being at the laundromat, or doing things in context so they use the words and they understand it. Now, I want you to focus on another thing with this picture. I want you to take a special note, and that is, look at this father's eyes. Take a second. And what do you see? Notice that he's looking directly at the child. He's not looking at his phone. He's not looking at what he's going to do next. He's looking directly at the child. And this is known as joint attention, that the child knows that the parent is with her in this case, that they are conveying what we call intersubjectivity. They understand one another. They're on the same plane with one another. He is not distracted by 1,000 other things going on. And this is how children also learn language. And this is really critically important. So one of the things that we always advocate is eye-to-eye instruction among teachers and children, that the teacher's eyes need to be focused on the child and individual children so they understand that I am paying attention to you, that you are important to me, and that you and I are communicating together. So this is a wonderful picture of a teacher. We were working with her. This was in Michigan, and we said to the teacher, why don't you get off the rocking chair and sit among the children so that your eyes can more clearly focus on what they are saying and what they are trying to convey. Now, many of you who are teachers of young children know that it's often difficult to understand what the child is saying. You know that. They're trying to convey, but they're a little bit all over the place. This is so typical of young children. And so it takes a great deal of attention for the teacher to hold it for a moment and say, I am listening to you, and I'm going to reframe what you're saying so that I'm sure that I understand your meaning. As you all know, you probably have heard about this particular study, but I wanted to take a moment to focus on it because we know that a lot of our children, many of our children, will experience rich language interactions with their families, but some will have less experience. And Hart and Risley, many years ago now, almost 20 years ago, did a very important study where they focused on the differences in the number of words children were likely to hear very early on in their life. Starting at 9 months, all the way through 3 years old, they followed children and their families in 3 groups, focusing on low-income families, working-class families, and professional families. And the result of their analysis is that low-income families talked less to their children than professional families. In fact, they called it a 30 million word catastrophe because those parents in professional families were talking much more with their children than those from low-income families. Moreover, they were also being much more responsive to the child's interactions rather than limited interactions with their families. Now, there's some important learnings, I think, here that we need to acknowledge. First thing, we must be very, very careful in ever making such broad statements as this particular study did about low-income families. We work with so-called low-income communities all the time, and we find there's an enormous variation in parent and child interaction, family and child interactions in those families. So we have to be careful about not assigning homogeneity to groups of families and individuals. But we also know that in many cases, circumstances such as poverty create situations where families are more fragmented. Parents are working multiple shifts. Parents are working at night and sleeping during the day. Lots of different things are happening in those families, which many times will mean that children will have less direct interaction with their families than in other cases. And so I think that what is useful about this study is suggesting that there is differences in experiences in responsive language interactions. Yet at the same time, it was a small scale study, about over 40 families in total. And it may not accurately really define the kind of ambient environment that many of our children are in. Yet I think there's some important implications for this study and for our thinking about our children. And that is that there is probably a word gap that some children have. We don't know how large. It may not be a catastrophe, but we do know that children will have different experiences very, very early on. And there's some serious implications related to that. And what I'd like to talk about is those implications. First, you'll see a slower acceleration of word learning strategies. So for example, remember when we talked about doggy, doggy, we were saying that the parent was using phonological awareness in actually helping children learn those words. So phonology and word learning are very connected. If we have fewer interactions, we'll have more limited phonological awareness, slower acceleration of word learning strategies. Relatedly, and again, related to our graph that we saw with the tip of the iceberg, we'll have children who have more limited background experiences. If there's less talk in the environment, if there's less daily interaction, there will be more limited background knowledge for the child to assume when they work on comprehension activities. So our job then is not to give up, certainly. I think it's a challenge. I think it's an exciting challenge because we know these children are highly capable. They're eager to learn. We have so much going for us, but we also know that the time is now and that you and I are going to have to find ways of accelerating their development, not just improving it. And so we'll show and focus on some of the ways in which we can do that. We also know that this means that there's going to be a wide diversity in today's average classroom. Let's face it, these children will come with many different experiences like we will have just described. They'll have many different languages. In one classroom in New York where I was dealing with these wonderful pre-K children, there were 22 different dialects in a classroom of 25 children. And this is a challenge, but it's also a wonderful opportunity because we know that children who are learning a language actually have more phonological skills than some of us who only speak a single language. So again, a wonderful opportunity. And then we'll have children who have different developmental needs and children who learn in different ways. And so it will be very important for us to focus on multiple ways of demonstrating knowledge with our children. So again, more implications for us. What does this mean for our instruction? Well, this means that it will require you to be more explicit in your teaching. And we'll talk more about this in a minute. What this means is sometimes what I notice is teachers will need to slow it down and repeat more than they often do. That many of us talk quite fast. We're going to have to slow it down, slow the pacing down a bit, and be more explicit in what we expect for our children and more explicit in our vocabulary and the words that we use. We also might use different strategies like gesturing or pointing. Some of the teachers I have seen have used gesturing as a wonderful way of saying, I understand, with their children. We will need greater attention to the frequency of word use. We need to use our words frequently because that's how children will remember them. They'll gain partial information and partial knowledge from one or two mappings of words, but you'll need much more frequency in order to provide in-depth knowledge to those children. And finally, we need greater opportunities for conversational interactions. And I'll show you how we do it. But one of the things that we know is you can't often with teachers in classrooms have many individual conversations because many individual conversations take a bit of time, especially with young children who are learning to articulate what they're trying to say. So we'll find ways of creating more conversational interactions in the classroom that allow for a great deal of language. I want you to listen a few minutes to our conversational turns.
What did people used to believe about the moon? Torsioning? That things could live on it. What did they think lived on the moon? Jessica? animals and trees and people.
Animals and trees and people lived on the moon. What else did they believe?
They believe that there was food on the moon.
They believed that food grew on the moon, Harrison. What else did they believe? Joanna?
That there was a pond of water.
They believed that water was on the moon.
Fish.
Are any of these things true?
No.
Let's find out. See if it tells us.
So I want you to pause and consider just for that minute. That was just a real brief interaction, and it was before reading a story, which is really important. So the teacher had been working on things like understanding the universe, and she engaged the kids in remembering what they were reading. But also, I wanted you to notice that she used a fair number of open-ended questions. And she also used what we call content-less prompts. What I mean by content-less prompts is she began with a closed-ended question, but then she opened it up and with an open-ended response. And she said, what else have you learned? What else? Anything more? Can you add to that? So one of the things that we know is by providing content-less prompts, what you're doing is you're making the child do the work and not the teacher. In other words, you're doing a handover to the child to say, come up with some of those strategies or some of the things that you've learned. Notice in that brief time, and I'm going to play it one more time so you can see it, that there were a fair number of conversational turns in that interaction. She did it quickly. It was very quick, but there were a number of conversational turns. Now, what I mean by conversational turns is this: I talk, you talk, I talk, you talk. Now, every time we use multiple conversational turns, what happens is we maintain children's attention. And this is absolutely critical. So some of our research, for example, says that a lot of learning is lost because we have to manage instruction. So how many times have you heard teachers say to sit in a certain way, or to pause when she says, now stop hitting so-and-so or whatever, or the bell rings and all of a sudden she has to stop instruction and everything goes crazy. So for example, some of those managements like crisscross applesauce take away from instruction and take away from the mood in which children are learning. And so what we try to do is a lot of conversational turns back and forth and back and forth. So we limit those kind of management issues. Notice that the teacher also repeated the child's response a fair number of times. The child said something and then she repeated it so that everybody could hear. It wasn't only because she wanted everybody to hear, because sometimes children's voices are very soft. What she wanted to do is mold and model the response. Take the child, almost like going back to our doggy experience, and take what the child was saying and reframe it in a way that was the adult way. And finally, notice that she's doing all this in whole group. And I think that many times what we do is we think that whole group is a time where children should just listen, or some of the smarty pants in the group raise their hand and have something to say. But what we're finding is a lot of conversational turns actually work well in whole group so that all children are responding at the same time. Now, the reason this is also good is that if you have second language learners, that enables them to be a member of the group without feeling shy or, I don't know the answer, or, oh gosh, I hope she doesn't pick on me. So a whole group experience creates a shared community, a shared literacy community that children can feel a part of. So I wanted you to hear it one more time and see if you can see some of these things.
What did people used to believe about the moon? Torsioning? That things could live on it. What did they think lived on the moon? Jessica?
Animals and trees and people.
Animals and trees and people lived on the moon? What else did they believe?
They believe that there was food on the moon.
They believed that food grew on the moon, Harrison. What else did they believe? Joanna?
There was a pond of water.
They believed that water was on the moon?
Fishes.
Are any of these things true?
No.
Let's find out. Let's see if it tells us.
So one of the things that we know, I hope you heard the end. Let's find out, because she made it exciting to begin to read. And one of the things that we know is these conversational turns lead to child engagement. And engagement is what we're all about. So I wanted you to look at these two pictures. These are pictures of my children working in the Bronx. And what I love about this picture is the great diversity of children we're blessed with in New York, but also that every child is involved and every child is engaged. And this is our goal. So vocabulary development, how does children's oral language affect vocabulary development? How does this affect how children are actually learning about words when they go to print? Well, to begin with, just really important is that if you don't have a strong oral language foundation, the words that you're learning in print won't make any meaning. And then that becomes word callers, or children who can phonologically read the words, but don't have the deep background knowledge to actually know what those words mean. And that becomes one of our hardest issues to address when we go to reading comprehension. So the oral language feeds the vocabulary development in ways that really, really strengthen what children are learning. But there are complexities of teaching vocabulary. One of the things that we know is that vocabulary is what is called an unconstrained skill. And what this means is that vocabulary is something that children will need to learn forever and ever. You and I do it. You are still learning new words all the time. So in my history, I certainly in a grade school didn't learn about Googling, right? Or Zooming, for example. So all of us are learning words constantly. But this makes it a challenge for us because it's not like ABCs. ABCs, for example, is considered a constrained skill. You learn your ABCs and that's it, right? But with vocabulary as an unconstrained skill, what we know is that you'll never have enough. You'll never learn enough vocabulary words. There are a whole lot of words. And so how many words do children need to know? Well, my colleague, E.D. Hirsch, said that some estimate as many as 80,000 words by the time they finish high school. So there's a lot of words that children will need to know at different levels of expertise. So some only partial knowledge, some in-depth knowledge. But how many words can we actually teach? Well, another estimate is just about 350 to 500 at most per year. So what this means is that children are going to have to learn word learning strategies or vocabulary acceleration strategies that mean that you're not teaching them. They're going to learn them on their own through self-teaching. And the way, of course, they learn through self-teaching is by reading a lot, reading independently, getting those family members to help us, our librarians and wonderful community workers helping us all help children experience more reading so that they learn more words. So the conclusion really is you need to be consciously aware of what words to teach. In other words, every time you think about what words am I going to teach, you need to be very consciously aware because you don't have a great deal of landscape or time to teach the words that children will need. So there are many different opinions, and this is, of course, where it gets confusing about word learning and vocabulary development. Andy B. Miller, everyone here, by the way, I admire so incredibly, and I can only say wonderful words about each one of these scholars. Andy B. Miller, for example, has developed a word list, and it's a book called Words Worth Teaching. And what the book is a partial English dictionary with parts of speech, definitions, sample statements, and ratings indicating at what grade level a word might be expected to be known. So what priority we should put on its teaching. So he has analyzed a huge corpus of words, and he basically say, these are the words that you need to teach first grade. These are the words second. These are the priority words third, etc. Now, Isabel Beck and Monty McCowan have a different approach, which many of you are aware of, and that's the 3-tier approach of vocabulary. And basically they say there's tier 1, which is very basic vocabulary, almost like colloquial speech, where it's, we actually call it supporting words, where you're focusing on some very basic vocabulary that children will probably know the words and they'll know the meaning of the words, so you don't have to go over them again and again. Then there are tier 2 words, which are high frequency words. They may have multiple meanings, and they call them sophisticated words, or words that help us talk about things in a more academic or sophisticated way. And there are tier 3 words, and these are subject related words where we focus on science and social studies and math related words. And as I said, tier 1 consists of the most basic words. These are words rarely require a great deal of direct instruction. In other words, kids will learn them because they know them in colloquial speech and typically do not have multiple meanings. So they center on tier 2 words, high frequency, multiple meaning words. And the third approach is Freddie Hebert, and she has a project called Text Project. And what she's done, this is an open educational resource that provides numerous research-based K-6 resources, including the intentional texts and the greater number of what she calls core words, words that have been drawn from 2,500 morphological families that drive vocabulary instruction. And so each of these will have, or at least 2, Andy B. Miller and Freddie Hebert list of words. Beck and McCowan, they focus more on a heuristic. In other words, consider the tier 2 words. And your understanding of tier 2 words in your class might be different than my tier 2 words in 4th grade instruction. So we have a different approach, and I wanted to describe some of the things that we think are really important. The first, we think that children need some sight word vocabulary. They need to, these are words that children will learn on sight. In other words, they see it, it's almost like an automatic response. And some of the words that we want children to know on site are called functional words. And I know that many of you may know the Dolch word list many years ago, and they have many of these functional words, where, what, there, this. And these words, I do not believe should be taught through any kind of flashcards because they have no inherent meaning. In other words, they function to help children understand other words. So I always teach these words, the functional words, in context of a sentence or phrase, because they have no meaning and they're hard to learn as a separate entity all by themselves. They look alike. Think of it, the, their, they, etc. So again, I teach those words in the context of a sentence. Children will need a lot of practice. You'll see that when they go to write or when they talk, very often they'll mix those words, but soon when they focus on the meaning of the words, they'll get those functional words. But I think also that words that help children negotiate their environment should be good sight words. These are words like exit and stop, McDonald's, Cheerios, wrong way. Those kinds of words that help children begin to understand that words have meaning and that words are permanent and the spelling does not change, and that they begin to feel powerful. So they understand a little bit more about their world that is very meaningful to them. I also think that in terms of sight words, we need to focus on what we call orthographically unique words. So for example, we don't want children to phonologically or phonetically figure out the word said or bright or station. In other words, these are phonologically unique words, orthographically unique words. In other words, they have spelling patterns that are unique. And we want children to begin to really see those and get those on site. We can also use our word families to help children learn those words: bright, fight, tight, etc. These are words that will help children in reading, but cannot be phonetically decoded. Often you don't need to define these words frequently at all, because children will know what said means. They know what bright means. They'll know what station probably means. So in other words, you can teach them orthographically. You don't have to go into deep meaning of those particular words. But this is why I'm going to give you a rationale for why I'm going to say how to select words that are important. I think the problem with lists and with core vocabulary, and even with thinking about tier 2 words, is that it doesn't address the real problem that many of you will have in teaching vocabulary in your class. So take a second and look at this paragraph. Read it silently to yourself. So if you've read that, this is from a 4th grade text. So it's not terribly difficult. This is from one of the stories in their core reading program. But notice that if I used either B. Miller's list or Becca McCowan's notion of tier 2 or Freddie Hebert's core vocabulary, I wouldn't be able to help children comprehend this story or this paragraph. So if you would read this, there are some things that children will not be able to either maybe decode, but even more importantly, understand in terms of its meaning. So sharks are actually a type of fish, no problem there. There are some similarities as well as differences between sharks and typical fish. Probably no problems there. Shark skeletons are made of cartilage. Cartilage is the bendy, tough substance in people's ears and nose. Like other fish, sharks have gills that help them breathe. Now, when I was reading this is what struck me. Number one, think about it. It's a pretty good paragraph. It's an ideal paragraph. It uses short sentences for informational text. It has a definition that is very clear. Cartilage are that bendy, tough substance of people's ears and nose. And it has gills that help them breathe. So breathing and gills, it really is a well-constructed paragraph if you think of it. Yet, I'm thinking, as I mentioned in the very beginning, like a child. And I still don't know what cartilage really is. I mean, I know it's this bendy stuff, and I know it's related to my ear and my nose. I have no clue really what it is or what it looks like. And the same thing about gills. I understand about breathing. I might understand that, gee, I have lungs, but like, are lungs and gills the same thing? In other words, to be able to really comprehend this text, I need to know those words, not a tier 2 words. I need to understand them more thoroughly. And so this is what we do to help children. So if we were focusing on that paragraph, we would focus on the notion of cartilage. We would take a picture and we'd show where it is on the fish, on the shark, and what that cartilage might actually look like. We'll show the gills, and we'll point to the gills, and the gills aren't like our lungs. Gee, I thought it was, but it wasn't. They almost look like little stripes of some kind. And finally, the skeleton. The skeleton looks different than I thought about it for most fish. So in other words, those pictures provided a real clear understanding. Now I can talk about it a little bit more. I can use some synonyms or some examples comparing my body with the body of a fish. I can understand it so much clearer because those words have been defined to me, and a picture support has helped me learn. So here is our definition of how to teach vocabulary and what children need in terms of instruction. We need to identify the words that are key to instruction beforehand. So in other words, I never say to the kids, what does this word mean? Because if I say to the children, what does this word mean? You'll get some of these smarty pants raising their hands or even doing something like this. And some of the shy children who, like me as a young child, would never say a word. So I always begin by identifying the words clearly. I'm explicit in identifying them. I use them in isolation, cartilage. Say it, boys and girls, say it with me, and then placing that word in a sentence. I'll use picture supports, and many times I'll use multimedia. You can use YouTube examples that are just so clear and exciting to the child. And then I always link it to meaningful content, and I'll repeat those words often. And by the way, cartilage is a fun word for children to know. They will want to repeat it because, as we talked about before, they want to act grown up. So the way in which we teach is through content-rich vocabulary teaching. We focus on the content we want children to learn. We always focus on nouns before verbs and adjectives and adverbs. And there's a reason for this, because nouns are provide mental imagery. If I say cartilage, now think about it in your own mind. I've shown you a picture, and now you have a mental representation of it. It's much easier than thinking about a verb that is less specific. So nouns are concrete and offer mental imagery, which will help children learn words more quickly, and they will also be able to attach the verbs, adjectives, and adverbs to these mental images that will help children learn. And then I teach words in categories rather than through themes. I'm going to show you what I mean. So I'm first going to talk about themes. Generally in instruction, we focus on themes. And let's take a theme of a grocery store. There's a cart, there's a cash register, there's a food, and that's a theme. And we know that a lot of people will say that's a semantic map. I've made a semantic map of grocery store. But if you think about it, you have to know the grocery store and already to know the map. In other words, the map doesn't generate an understanding of the grocery store. It's a grocery store first. You have to know about groceries to know how to do that map. So in other words, there's nothing inherent in the semantic map that actually helps you understand more about grocery stores. It's actually the other way around. So what we do is we teach through categories. And what we'll do is we'll say that categories have what we call inductive potential. So I will say an insect is a living thing. It needs food and water to survive. Then I'll say to the child, a reptile is a living thing. What do we now know about the reptile? It needs food and water to survive. So notice that they have common properties. Now, when I say a mosquito and a moth is an insect, what do we know now about a mosquito and a moth? Well, we know that they need food and water to survive. A moth and a mosquito and a wasp are all a type of insect. An insect needs food and water to survive. An alligator is a reptile, which is different, and a reptile needs food and water to survive. So what we're doing is we're organizing children's understanding of words into big ideas and concepts. And this, what I'm showing you right now, is actually the beginning of conceptual map that will help children learn the relationship between words and their categories. This is how we support children's conceptual development and categories, because categories lead to concepts. Concepts leads to knowledge networks. So we're teaching words, vocabulary, to move to larger elements, concepts, to move to a fuller knowledge network. And one of the ways in which we do it is which one doesn't belong. Do you remember this from Sesame Street? It's just a fun way to get children to think about how things are similar and how things are different. Similarities and differences are the precursor to synonyms and antonyms. And this, again, is a very fundamental activity, but kids love it. And it's very instructionally useful. We also know that word sorts are just terrific. When we think about take a whole bunch of words and which words are a type of fruit and which words are a type of vegetable, or you can do it another way. You can say apple, pear, strawberry, peaches are all a type of, that's right, fruit. So every time we do this in word sorts of this kind, you can't ever do it enough, because the children will love doing this. And also you're helping them organizing their vocabulary. They're beginning to build this knowledge network, which is so essential. And this is the way we do it for very young children. You look at all these pictures, how are they alike? How are they different? And you're helping them in sorting words. So the most efficient way to teach vocabulary, of course, is through storybook reading. And we always do this as a whole group. And the reason is we want to get everybody a shared understanding. We're all on the same plane. We're all working together. It's not terribly long, but we want to begin the day. We do this, by the way, all the way through elementary school and middle school. Kids love to be read to, because when we read, we are using more sophisticated vocabulary than they will be able to read. And we're also introducing them and having them hear and develop partial understandings of these vocabulary words. So we always start with whole group. We introduce the words we want them to know. We begin as an oral activity, and then we connect to print. We place all children on the same playing field, and we'll use narrative and informational text. Now take a minute and remember that narrative is an easier genre for children to learn than informational text. It has less dense vocabulary, less conceptual load. But we want our children to really know informational text, because most of the time you and I use information. It's not, we're not sitting around most of our day reading a book, a storybook. We're reading information. So informational book genre is very important and very instrumental. And we need children to not only know it, but to enjoy it. So I want to show you how we do it. We do it very simply. We group storybooks into text sets. Now, what is a text set? It's a collection of books of different genres that support vocabulary teaching and focus on a concept or a particular topic. Now, notice we're not saying themes, we're saying topics. So our goal is a focus on informational topic like oceans, or sea animals, or marine mammals, something like that. And what we'll do is we will encourage children to focus on narrative text and informational text in learning about those words. Now, the benefits of a text set is the children will be introduced to about the same words again and again and again. We'll read these books over a series of a week, and sometimes 2 weeks, and sometimes even 3 weeks. So we'll focus because we want children to get an in-depth knowledge of a particular topic. And the way in which they do that is they begin to master the language in those bundles of texts, and they'll begin to use them more and more frequently. So this is the way we do it. We have a progression of text. And the reason, again, is that informational text is more dense. So we'll start with a predictable book. We then go to more of a rhyming book. We go to a narrative nonfiction storybook, and finally to an informational book. By the time they get to the informational book, they will have heard these words again and again. Now notice that I'm using narrative nonfiction or a storybook. Many of our storybooks provide information. They just do it in a narrative way. And narrative books hit the heart very often. So we always use narrative because children have an inherent understanding of once upon a time a story is told. The reason we use predictable books is that they can be almost a mnemonic device. So for example, they tend to use, that's Sam I am, that's Sam I am. I do not like green eggs and ham. Most of us remember that from our childhood. Or conjunction, junction, what's your function? So those predictable words those predictable books are really engaging, and they help children remember words, which are really important. So the way in which we do this is we try not to interrupt the story too often. We preview the vocabulary words that we described before. We have a rich discussion following the book, but I would encourage you not to interrupt the reading too much, because the children really need to hear the story. They really need to listen to the text. The text is providing the intervention in this case. Every time you stop it, very often that can break the moment, the spell, the wonders of reading a story. So I may use brief closed-ended questions just to get kids excited and on the same page, but I will, and to encourage a conversational turn to maintain some attention. But other than that, I'll use open-ended questions at the end of our reading to get them to revisit the book again, maybe to reread the book again if I have enough time. So I want to show you what this teacher did. It's the same teacher you saw before, but I wanted you to focus on some of the things that she highlights in, and I want you to look at the engagement of the child, of the children at the time.
What do you know about planets and asteroids? How are they alike?
How they are like is that they both go in space.
Ooh, they both are in space, and you said they both float around. What's that word, Jessica? That we know. What do planets do? And what do asteroids do? Rudy?
The orbit.
They orbit. They both orbit. Yeah. Now, think about what you've learned about telescopes and space probes. How are telescopes and space probes alike?
Space probes, it's in the earth and it can see to outer space, and telescope can see outer space too.
Joanna, can you add to that?
Wait, but a space probe flies to space and takes photos of space, but it's kind of the same because it's still space. And then through a telescope, you could see all the way in space too.
So they're the same because you can see space from both of them. How are they different? Oh, what's different about them?
But I have a question for you, Darshini. You said that it takes photos, right? But why didn't you say that it flies to take photos?
So could you just add that to what she said? That it also travels into space? Where the telescope stays on Earth, doesn't it? And we just look through it. Kimani.
I have a question for Anthony.
Sure.
When you were talking, you said that you can, when you're underwater, you can breathe on. When you breathe in, you can still No, I said if you can breathe underwater. No one can do that. No, it can't. But it's space. So why do we go through your nose to your nostrils?
So what is she saying?
I'm trying to say that.
Let me speak. How can you breathe underwater?
I hold your breath.
Remember when we went to the aquarium
Yeah.
and we saw the man who was under the water?
Yeah.
He was breathing. What was helping him to breathe?
The oxygen.
Give someone else a turn. What was helping him breathe?
The oxygen.
The oxygen. He was wearing a tank on his back with oxygen, and he had on a special suit so that he can breathe. So it's similar in space. The astronauts, when they go into space, they have a special suit and they have oxygen to help them breathe. Friends, you did a good job. Kiss your brains.
So I hope you heard the end. It said, kiss your brain, which I thought was so charming. So we also know that that many of our children will have many of our children who are language learners. And here are some additional supports that they can really, really help. Notice that she used think time. There was a moment where the child was trying to articulate what he was saying, but it was hard. It was hard. And so she gave him moments. She just waited and used wait time or think time. She also, again, repeated what the children were saying, articulated it in a summary kind of statement. And she used a lot of picture supports and visuals. So these, we know that we have 10 strategies that we often talk about for English learners, that we know that they are so capable of learning. But sometimes they will need some of these additional supports. We always involve our parents. So this is, we're teaching the World of Words, our program, which is free open access materials. And what we do after that is we'll take this and we write a refrigerator note. I know, everybody goes to the refrigerator. They're constantly, right, going to the refrigerator. So what we'll do is a parent note that will focus on the vocabulary words that the children were learning and the topic they were learning every day. And we'll say to them, please put it on your refrigerator. So every time you go to the refrigerator, you can see and focus on those words. So why is all this so powerful? And that is because it supports word and world knowledge. In other words, children are learning as they're learning about words. You don't tend to learn things that are meaningless. If someone tells me something and I know it has no relevance in the world to me, it's very hard for me to remember. So children will always need to have something that is meaningful in context. Children who know what the word means orally will then be able to apply it more easily to print. And notice what we did in using and focusing on the same topic over a number of days in our storybook reading. What we were doing is establishing intertextual links. Now, what that means is children could compare a story that they read in the beginning of the week to an informational text that they heard and read at the end of the week. So in other words, they begin to tie their knowledge on the basis of their readings, which is really important. They also are hearing the same words again and again. They're hearing cartilage and gills again and again. And they'll often hear those words in different contexts. So children will learn the multiple meanings of those words and not just the words in one single context. And then finally, multiple exposure to words is just a major source of word and world knowledge. So my conclusion in reducing disparities, the children need to learn words in meaningful context. That makes it meaningful and interesting to children. That content-rich vocabulary not only teaches them the vocabulary they will need and how it relates to comprehension, but also greater knowledge about that topic. Did you notice when you heard the children talk that they were using words like oxygen and asteroid, words that you would never think kindergarten children could learn? They need to, in doing so, in teaching these words in categories, we're actually accelerating their vocabulary development because we're creating a mechanism for self-teaching. We call it inductive potential. So if we know something about sharks and fish, we can inference more about the generic or the broader category of fish or marine mammals or animals in the water. And we believe that acceleration actually leads to more learning strategies. In other words, we're actually teaching them new strategies for learning words, which they will then apply on their own when they go to independent reading. So thank you. It's been delightful to be with you. I wish we were all alive, maybe next year. And I'd love to just end with questions that you may raise among yourself. I would love to hear more in the chat or in ways, are some of the ways that you support vocabulary development in your classroom. And I'd love for you to be able to share them with others, because this is such a critical topic in terms of what children need to know. And second, I'd love to understand, how do we encourage breadth and depth in vocabulary instruction for our students? And finally, we didn't talk about it today, but what's the role of screen media and ebooks and the whole digital revolution in relationship to children's vocabulary learning? Finally, here are some resources and free materials: www.readwithwow.com for lesson plans that you can simply download, and materials for families and parents to do at home, as well as some of the citations that we've mentioned today. I'd like to thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, so much for taking part in this series with us, the vocabulary series. I wasn't able to interact with the chat during this session. I know Jeannie was monitoring that, so thank you so much for that. So I wasn't also able to jump in to grab the exit slide. So while I grab that real quickly, Jeannie, so I'm just share our patent literacy resource hub with you, and I'll have the exit slide in just a moment.
Thanks, Pam. Let me see if I can grab it here for everybody to take a look. Okay, hopefully you can see our Patent Literacy Resource Hub website that we've been working very diligently on this year. We'd just like you to know that this website, and let me do this right now, I'm going to copy the link and throw it in the chat so that you can maybe bookmark this. So that you can revisit it later, because it is pretty extensive. We've got multiple recordings on here. We have just about every session from our 2020 Patent Literacy Symposium on this site, which is just a wonderful addition, with the facilitation guides for PLCs that match the different sessions. So our team has been working on that very hard this year, providing some PLC facilitation guides to go with the sessions. And what we've done is we've grouped them by topic here on our Literacy Resource Hub. So it's not just, you know, an open all of the sessions all together. We've sort of like organized them a little bit for you so that you and your teams can really take a look at a certain topic area and go deeper with it. We have recordings from our Patent Literacy Expert Series, where we also include all of these Scarborough's rope session recordings. Not only do we have them on the Padlet, but we also have them here on our site. We have Pam's Leaders in Learning Literacy webcasts on this site, our quick picks, our snippets, our patent reads. We do have a tribute to William Van Cleve that we're preparing on the site, and some information about our literacy team. So as this banner says at the top, we are constantly revising and revamping the information on this site. Oh, good. I'm glad that some of you are glad to have the link. Thank you so much. There was a question about text sets that I saw come in. Nancy, did you catch that?
No, I just saw something.
Oh, here it is. Are there any lists of text sets available for reference as a resource to help get started? I'm not aware of any text set lists, but here's a really revolutionary idea. So many of you may have bins of level text sitting around in your classrooms. And we at Patton might suggest that you take a look at those books, right? They're nice little books, and arrange them rather into topical text sets. So rather than using them as level text, taking a topic area, maybe it's like marine animals, like we heard of earlier, and arranging those in a text set. So I'm sure that you have lots of materials in your school buildings that you could pull together and make text sets on your own, but what a great project that would be, right?
Good.
And I think the question about text sets, for me, I made a connection to what I talk about when I talk about comprehension, and thinking about how you choose your text that you're using for read alouds or that you're using for class reading. You're thinking about what those enduring understandings are, those critical topics that you want your students to acquire. You have to keep in mind that comprehension is not just about strategy or making our way through the text, but it's making our way through the text so that we learn something. And when we're able to group our texts, whether they be narrative, informational, or both, which is ideal, then we're able to build that knowledge base that she was referencing across the grade levels.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Jeannie, so much for sharing the Patent Literacy Resource Hub. We are very proud of it and continue to add to it. So I guess not me being able to navigate with my computer was a kind of a little bit of a blessing. So we could share that this evening before we share the exit slide. So I'm going to put the link in the chat. If you need Act 48, please complete this form. You have to complete it by midnight tonight. My suggestion is that you just do it right now. So I'll put it in the chat. Remember, our next time together is August 31st, again, 7 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. We will be doing a tribute to William Van Cleve, and then Nancy Hennessy and Nancy Eberhardt will be taking a deep dive into language structures, not only the research, but also lots of practice resources for you. So here it goes into the chat. And again, thank you, thank you, thank you. Over 200 people attending tonight on a sunny summer day. Oh my goodness. I was texting Jeannie how dedicated teachers are and how fortunate we are to spend this time with you. Oops, I'm sorry. Oh goodness gracious. Let me go to that, because what it did is it just put my past Padlet in there. And we will put the recording and the PDF. Yes, there you go. It went in super duper. So I'll stay on as I usually do, just to make sure that everyone gets the link if they need the Act 48 hours. But thank you again so very much. Have a wonderful evening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you August 31st. A big thank you to Jeannie and to Nancy for all the help tonight and for your leadership and support.
Jeannie really provides lots and lots of support. Most appreciative of her. Yeah.
Glad to be here. Thank you, ladies.
Thanks, everyone.
I'm really excited, Pam. I'm seeing a lot of comments of people who are arranging their level text into text
Oh,
sets
good. Yeah.
in the classroom. That's
So
exciting.
glad to hear that. Great idea, Jeannie. I know we've been working with school districts and they have been transforming their book rooms to look more like the simple view of reading. Lots of decodable text to support accurate and automatic word reading, but also then they've been taking their level text and creating text sets, and it's making a big difference.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff.
It is. And thank you for all the thank yous in the chat. That's so kind of you. We really appreciate the thanks.